The sound of metal crutches clicking against marble courthouse steps echoed through the hallway, but it was nothing compared to the sound that would shatter my world just minutes later, my own father's laughter. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus Chen, and 3 months ago, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. Real betrayal doesn't come from strangers or enemies. It comes from the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally, standing in a courtroom and mocking the very thing that keeps you upright. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March. I was driving home from my job at Henderson Electronics in downtown Phoenix when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of 5th Avenue and Maple Street. The impact sent my Honda Civic spinning across 3 lanes of traffic before it slammed into a concrete barrier. When I woke up in Phoenix General Hospital 4 days later, Dr. Rodriguez was the first person I saw. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but her words cut through me like surgical steel. "Marcus, we did everything we could to save your right leg, but the damage to your femur and knee was extensive. You'll need crutches for at least 8 months, possibly longer. Physical therapy will be intensive, but with dedication, you should regain most of your mobility." Most of my mobility. Those 4 words haunted me during the endless hours of rehabilitation that followed. My left leg had escaped with minor fractures, but my right leg felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. The titanium rod they'd inserted ran from my hip to my knee, and every step sent sharp reminders of that March afternoon coursing through my body. My girlfriend Sarah stayed for the first 2 weeks. She brought flowers, helped me navigate the insurance paperwork, and even researched the best physical therapists in Arizona. But as the reality of my situation settled in, I watched her pull away. The breaking point came during my 3rd week of recovery when I struggled for 10 minutes just to get into her car. She didn't say anything that day, but I could see it in her eyes. The future she'd imagined with me was crumbling with every labored step I took. "I can't do this, Marcus," she finally admitted on a rainy Thursday evening in April. "I thought I could handle it, but watching you struggle every day, seeing you so different from who you used to be, I'm sorry, but I need space to figure things out." Space, another word that would join most in my vocabulary of loss. The lawsuit against the drunk driver Thomas Brennan seemed straightforward. My attorney, Jennifer Walsh, assured me it was an open and shut case. Brennan had been driving with a blood alcohol content of 0.16, twice the legal limit, and had 2 prior DUI convictions. He destroyed my car, my leg, my relationship, and my ability to work in the electronics warehouse where I'd spent the last 5 years lifting heavy equipment. "The settlement should cover your medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering," Jennifer explained during our first meeting. Cases like these typically resolve quickly when the liability is this clear. But nothing about my situation would prove to be typical. The first surprise came when my father, Robert Chen, showed up at my apartment unannounced 3 weeks before the trial. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since our last explosive argument about my lack of ambition and his disappointment in my career choices. He stood in my doorway wearing an expensive navy suit I'd never seen before, his silver hair perfectly styled, looking every inch the successful real estate developer he'd become. "Marcus," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I heard about the accident. We need to talk." I let him in, though every instinct told me not to. He surveyed my small apartment with barely concealed disdain, his eyes lingering on the grab bars I'd installed in the hallway and the shower chair visible through my open bedroom door. When his gaze fell on my crutches leaning against the kitchen counter, something shifted in his expression. But it wasn't sympathy.
"You're suing for how much?" he asked after I explained the lawsuit. $2.8 million. Jennifer says it's reasonable given the circumstances." He laughed, but it wasn't a warm sound. "Reasonable? You've always been good at taking the easy way out, haven't you?" The easy way out. As if learning to walk again was somehow cheating. "This isn't about taking shortcuts, Dad. I was the victim of a drunk driver. I have every right to—" "Rights," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Everyone talks about rights these days. What about responsibility? What about making something of yourself instead of looking for a handout? I stared at him, feeling something cold settle in my chest. A handout? I nearly died. My leg is held together with titanium rods and screws. I lost my job, my girlfriend, my independence. And now you want to get rich off it. His voice carried the same cutting tone I remembered from childhood. The one that had made me feel small and worthless for most of my teenage years. Tell me, Marcus, what exactly are you planning to do with that money? Buy yourself a bigger apartment? A nicer car? Maybe find another girlfriend who's willing to overlook your limitations? The word limitations hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. In that moment, I realized my father hadn't come to check on me or offer support. He'd come to judge me, just like he always had. But this time felt different. This time there was something else behind his criticism, something that made my skin crawl with unease. "Why are you really here, Dad?" He straightened his tie and walked toward my window, looking out at the parking lot where my beat-up replacement car sat among a sea of similarly modest vehicles. "I've been following your case. That drunk driver, Brennan? He doesn't have insurance coverage that high. You know who's going to end up paying the bulk of that settlement?" I didn't answer, but my stomach was already sinking. His employer. Brennan was driving a company truck when he hit you. He worked for Morrison Construction, and they carry a $50 million liability policy. He turned back to me with a smile that made my blood run cold. Interesting coincidence, don't you think? What's interesting about it? Morrison Construction has been bidding against my company for the Riverside Mall development project. It's a $100 million contract, Marcus. The biggest deal of my career. But if Morrison gets hit with a massive lawsuit payout right before the final bids are submitted, he shrugged, as if the implications were obvious. The room seemed to tilt around me. You're saying my accident somehow benefits you. I'm saying life has a funny way of working out sometimes. Your settlement could put Morrison in a very difficult financial position. Difficult enough that they might have to withdraw their bid or significantly reduce their offer to stay solvent. I felt sick, not from pain this time, but from the dawning realization of what my father was really saying. You want me to pursue this lawsuit because it helps your business? I want you to pursue what you're entitled to. If it happens to benefit me as well, that's just a bonus. He picked up his leather briefcase and headed toward the door. The trial's next week, right? I'll be there to support you, son. It's important for the judge to see you have family behind you. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for hours, staring at my crutches and trying to process what had just happened. My father, who had spent years criticizing my choices and expressing disappointment in my achievements, was suddenly interested in my welfare, but only because my suffering might make him money. The weekend before the trial, I called Jennifer to discuss strategy one final time. She was confident but cautioned me about the defense's likely approach.
"They'll try to minimize your injuries and future earning capacity," she warned. "Brennan's attorney will probably argue that your leg will heal completely and that you're exaggerating your limitations. That's standard practice in these cases. What should I expect? Lots of questions about your daily activities, your pain levels, your ability to work. They might even suggest you're malingering, faking, or exaggerating symptoms for financial gain. Just be honest and don't let them rattle you." Malingering. Another word to add to my growing vocabulary of humiliation. The night before the trial, I barely slept. I kept thinking about my father's visit and his twisted logic that my pain was somehow justified by his potential profit. I thought about Sarah, who couldn't handle watching me struggle. I thought about Dr. Rodriguez and her carefully chosen words about regaining most of my mobility. But mostly, I thought about Thomas Brennan, the man who had been drunk at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon and decided to drive anyway. I wondered if he understood what he'd taken from me, or if he saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his freedom.
I had no way of knowing that by the end of the next day, the person I'd be angriest with wouldn't be Brennan at all. The Maricopa County Courthouse stood like a fortress against the Arizona morning sky, its limestone walls reflecting the harsh desert sun. I arrived 30 minutes early, my crutches creating an awkward rhythm as I navigated the security checkpoint. The metal detector beeped twice, once for the titanium rod in my leg, once for my crutches. And the guard's sympathetic nod somehow made me feel worse instead of better. Jennifer met me at the elevator, her burgundy suit crisp and professional. Ready for this, Marcus? I wasn't, but nodding seemed easier than explaining the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach since dawn. Courtroom 4B was smaller than I had expected from watching legal dramas on television. The wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting gave it an institutional feel that reminded me uncomfortably of the hospital. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, positioning my crutches carefully beside my chair. Across the aisle, Thomas Brennan sat with his defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Hayes, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Brennan himself was nothing like I had imagined. In my mind, he'd become a monster, someone whose face radiated cruelty and callous disregard. Instead, he was ordinary. Mid-40s, thinning brown hair, wearing an ill-fitting gray suit that looked borrowed. When our eyes met for a brief moment, I saw something that caught me off guard. Genuine remorse.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The gallery behind us was mostly empty, except for a few court reporters and legal observers. My father sat in the third row, checking his phone with the casual air of someone attending a routine business meeting. He'd dressed down from his usual expensive suits, wearing khakis and a blue button-down that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but looked appropriately humble for the occasion. Judge Patricia Mullins called the court to order at precisely 9 a.m. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail in the room. Her voice carried authority without being intimidating. This is a civil proceeding regarding Chen versus Brennan and Morrison Construction Company. We're here to determine damages resulting from a motor vehicle collision that occurred on March 15th of this year. The next hour blurred together in a parade of technical testimony. Police officers described the accident scene, paramedics detailed my injuries, and Dr. Rodriguez explained my medical treatment with clinical precision. Through it all, I found myself watching the jury, 12 ordinary people who would decide how much my shattered leg was worth. When Jennifer called me to the witness stand, my crutches seemed impossibly loud against the courtroom's polished floor. I'd practiced this moment dozens of times, but actually sitting in that chair with everyone staring at me felt surreal. Mr. Chen, can you describe your life before the accident? Jennifer began. I talked about my job at Henderson Electronics, the physical demands of warehouse work, my plans to eventually move into management. I described my relationship with Sarah, our weekend hiking trips to Camelback Mountain, the way I used to play pickup basketball at the community center every Thursday night, and how has the accident affected these activities? This was the hard part. I explained the constant pain, the way my leg cramped during long periods of sitting or standing. I talked about the depression that had settled over me like a fog, the nights when phantom pain jerked me awake, the simple tasks that now required careful planning. I can't stand for more than 20 minutes without severe discomfort. Stairs are a challenge. I had to give up basketball, hiking, even long walks through the mall. Most days, by evening, the pain is so intense I can barely function. Patricia Hayes approached for cross-examination like a shark scenting blood. She was polite, but relentless, picking apart every claim I'd made. Mr. Chen, you drove yourself here today, correct? Yes. And you walked from the parking lot to the courthouse? With crutches, yes. But you walked. You're not in a wheelchair or unable to move independently. Jennifer objected, but I could see where this was heading.
Hayes spent the next 20 minutes trying to prove I was exaggerating my limitations, asking detailed questions about my daily routine, my physical therapy progress, my ability to perform basic tasks. Isn't it true that your doctor expects you to make a full recovery within the next 6 months? She said I should regain most of my mobility, not full recovery. Most, Hayes repeated as if the word were suspect. Can you define what most means to you, Mr. Chen? It was a trap, but I didn't know how to avoid it. It means I'll always have limitations, pain on certain days, difficulty with activities that require extended standing or walking. But you'll be able to work again. Eventually, yes, but not in the same capacity. So you're not permanently disabled. The question hung in the air like an accusation. I wasn't permanently disabled, at least not in the way most people understood the term. I could walk, drive, take care of myself, but something fundamental had been taken from me. The easy confidence in my own body, the ability to move through the world without constant awareness of my limitations. After my testimony, Jennifer called Dr. Rodriguez to explain my long-term prognosis. The medical details were complex, but the summary was simple. I would improve significantly over the next year, but complete healing was unlikely. Arthritis in the affected joints was almost certain. Future surgeries might be necessary.
Then came Morrison Construction's representative, a nervous accountant named Kevin Walsh, who confirmed that Brennan had been driving a company vehicle when he hit me. The company's insurance policy would cover damages up to $50 million, he testified, though he emphasized they disputed both liability and the extent of my claimed injuries. During the lunch recess, I sat in the courthouse cafeteria picking at a sandwich I couldn't taste. My father slid into the seat across from me without invitation. "You're doing well up there," he said, though something in his tone suggested criticism rather than praise. "Jennifer says the afternoon will be harder. Hayes is going to call her own medical expert." Medical experts can say whatever they're paid to say. He leaned back in his plastic chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. "The important thing is that the jury sees you as sympathetic, injured but not helpless, deserving of compensation but not looking for a handout." The way he said handout made my skin crawl. "This isn't about looking deserving, Dad. It's about getting fair compensation for what happened to me." "Fair," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know what's fair, Marcus? Fair is when someone works hard, takes risks, builds something meaningful. Fair is when effort gets rewarded and laziness gets punished." I stared at him. "Are you saying I deserve to get hit by a drunk driver?" "I'm saying maybe this is the kick in the pants you needed. Maybe losing your easy warehouse job and your girlfriend who is probably holding you back anyway is exactly what you need to finally make something of yourself." The sandwich turned to cardboard in my mouth. "Make something of myself? Dad, I nearly died. I'm in constant pain. What you can barely do is stop feeling sorry for yourself." His voice carried the sharp edge that had terrorized me as a child. "You think getting money from this lawsuit is going to solve your problems? You think it's going to make you whole again?" Before I could answer, he continued. "Here's what's going to happen, Marcus. You're going to win this case because Brennan was drunk and the facts are on your side. Morrison Construction is going to pay you more money than you've ever seen in your life. And then what? You'll buy a nice house, maybe a fancy car, and you'll spend the rest of your life limping around feeling like a victim." "I am a victim." "No," he said, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "You're a survivor. There's a difference. Victims sit around waiting for someone else to fix their problems. Survivors figure out how to build something better from the pieces they have left." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but something in his words echoed thoughts I'd been trying to suppress for months. Had I been feeling sorry for myself? Was I so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see what might still be possible? "The question," my father continued, "is whether you're going to use this settlement as a crutch for the rest of your life, or whether you're finally going to grow up and do something meaningful." His choice of the word crutch felt deliberate and cruel. I looked down at the metal supports leaning against my chair, then back at his face. For just a moment, I thought I saw something like genuine concern in his expression,
but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. When court reconvened, Hayes called her medical expert, Dr. Franklin Moore, an orthopedic surgeon from Scottsdale who specialized in traumatic injuries. He was everything Dr. Rodriguez wasn't: arrogant, dismissive, and clearly expensive. In my professional opinion, Mr. Chen's injuries, while certainly painful and inconvenient, are not permanently disabling. Modern surgical techniques and aggressive physical therapy should restore him to near normal function within 18 to 12 months. Near normal function, Hayes repeated. Can you explain what that means? It means he'll be able to return to work, engage in recreational activities, and live independently without significant limitations. Some minor discomfort during weather changes or after extended physical activity is normal and expected, but hardly debilitating. Jennifer's cross-examination was fierce, but couldn't entirely undermine Moore's credentials or confidence. The jury listened intently as he described my injuries in technical terms that somehow made them sound routine and manageable. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself studying the faces of the 12 people who would decide my fate. Would they see me as deserving of compensation or as someone trying to get rich off an unfortunate accident? Did they understand that money couldn't restore what I'd lost? Or did they think, like my father seemed to, that I was taking the easy way out? By the time Judge Mullins adjourned for the day, my leg was throbbing and my head was pounding. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments and jury deliberation. Tonight, I had to somehow find the strength to face whatever verdict they reached. As I made my way toward the courtroom exit, I noticed a man in the back row I hadn't seen before. He was probably in his per-50s, with short-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested military training. He wore a simple black suit and watched the proceedings with the focused attention of someone who understood conflict and consequence. When our eyes met, he nodded slightly, not with pity or curiosity, but with something that looked like recognition, as if he saw something in my situation that others had missed.
I had no idea that this stranger would soon change everything. The second day of trial began with an unexpected twist. As I settled into my seat at the plaintiff's table, Jennifer leaned over with a concerned expression. "Marcus, there's been a development. Hayes filed a motion this morning requesting permission to present new evidence about your pre-accident medical history." My stomach dropped. "What medical history?" "Apparently they found records from when you were 17, a skiing accident that resulted in a minor fracture to your right tibia. They're arguing it shows a pre-existing weakness that contributed to the severity of your current injuries." I barely remembered the skiing incident. It had been a hairline fracture that healed completely within 6 weeks. And I'd never had problems with that leg again until Brennan's truck slammed into my car. But I could see how a skilled attorney might twist it into something more significant. Judge Mullins heard arguments on the motion before the jury was brought in. Hayes stood at the podium with a stack of medical records, her voice carrying false concern. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has presented his case as if you were in perfect health before this accident. But these records show a history of right leg injuries that clearly predisposed him to more severe damage than a healthy individual would have sustained." Jennifer fired back immediately. "This is a desperate attempt to blame the victim for injuries that were entirely caused by the defendant's criminal negligence. A minor fracture from over a decade ago has no bearing on the catastrophic damage caused by Mr. Brennan's drunk driving." The judge took 15 minutes to review the records before ruling. "I'll allow limited questioning about the prior injury, but only as it relates to pre-existing conditions. The jury will be instructed that any prior medical issues do not excuse the defendant's actions." It was a partial victory. But I could see the worry in Jennifer's eyes. Every complication made our case harder to win decisively. When the jury returned, Hayes called her next witness, my former supervisor at Henderson Electronics, Dale Morrison. I was shocked to see him walk into the courtroom wearing a suit that looked like it had been borrowed from someone twice his size. "Mr. Morrison, you supervised the plaintiff for 3 years, correct?"
Yes, ma'am. Marcus worked in our warehouse from 2021 until his accident. Can you describe his work performance? Dale shifted uncomfortably in the witness chair. Marcus was adequate. He showed up on time, did what was asked of him, no major complaints. Adequate. The word stung more than it should have. I'd thought Dale respected my work, but apparently I'd been just another employee punching a clock. Did Mr. Chen ever express ambitions for advancement? Did he seek additional training or responsibilities? Not really. He seemed content doing the basic warehouse duties. Never asked about management training or showed interest in learning other aspects of the business. Hayes nodded, as if this confirmed something important. Would you say he was the type of employee who took initiative or someone who preferred to do the minimum required? Jennifer's objection was sustained, but the damage was done. The jury had heard that I was unmotivated, content with mediocrity, lacking ambition. Hayes was painting a picture of someone who wouldn't have achieved much even without the accident. During cross-examination, Jennifer tried to rehabilitate my reputation, getting Dale to admit that I had never missed deadlines, had no disciplinary actions, and was well-liked by coworkers. But the initial impression lingered. The morning's testimony concluded with Dr. Franklin Moore returning to the stand. This time, Hayes had him review my 17-year-old medical records in detail. Dr. Moore, having examined these previous injury records, does this change your assessment of the plaintiff's current condition? It does. The prior fracture, even though minor, created a weakness in the bone structure that made it more susceptible to severe damage. A person without this pre-existing condition might have sustained less serious injuries in the same accident. The implication was clear. I was partially responsible for the extent of my own injuries because of a skiing accident from my teenage years. It was medically questionable and morally reprehensible, but I could see some jurors nodding along with the logic. During the lunch break, my father found me again, this time in the courthouse lobby. He was agitated in a way I'd rarely seen, pacing back and forth while talking on his phone about incompetent contractors and missed deadlines. When he finally hung up, his frustration seemed to focus on me. "This isn't going as well as your lawyer promised, is it?" I was too tired to sugarcoat it. Hayes is better than we expected. She's making me look like a lazy opportunist who was already damaged goods.
Maybe because that's exactly what you are. The words hit like a physical blow. I stared at my father, waiting for him to take it back, to say he'd spoken in anger. Instead, he doubled down. "Do you think I don't know about your work history, Marcus? Do you think I haven't been watching you coast through life for the past decade? You took the first job that would hire you and never tried to do anything more challenging. You dated a girl who was nice enough but had no real ambition. You lived in the same apartment for 5 years without trying to improve your situation. So I deserved to get hit by a drunk driver? You deserved to face some consequences for your choices. Maybe not this extreme, but something to wake you up." He leaned against the marble wall, studying me with cold calculation. "The question is whether you're going to use this as an excuse to keep being mediocre or whether you're finally going to demand something better from yourself." I wanted to walk away, but my crutches made dramatic exits impossible. Instead, I was trapped listening to my father dissect my failures with surgical precision. "You know what really bothers me, Marcus? It's not that you got hurt. It's that you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself instead of figuring out how to turn the situation into an opportunity." "An opportunity? I can barely walk without pain. I lost my job, my girlfriend." "You lost a job you hated and a girlfriend who didn't really care about you. Maybe this accident saved you from wasting another decade on things that were never going to make you happy."
There was something almost manic in his eyes now, an intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable. Dad, what's really going on here? Why are you so invested in this trial? For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw something desperate underneath the criticism and manipulation. Because I need you to win, Marcus. I need Morrison Construction to pay out that settlement. The admission hung between us like a toxic cloud. My father needed me to win. Not wanted, needed. The Riverside Mall project, I said, the pieces finally clicking together. You're in trouble, aren't you? He didn't answer directly, but his silence was confirmation enough. Business is complicated, Marcus. Sometimes you have to make strategic decisions that others don't understand. What kind of strategic decisions? The kind that put everything on the line for a chance at something bigger. He straightened his tie with hands that trembled slightly. The Morrison bid is just one obstacle. If they're financially compromised by your settlement, my company gets the contract. It's a $100 million project that could set us up for the next decade. The full scope of his manipulation was breathtaking. He hadn't come to support me through a difficult time. He'd come to ensure I pursued maximum damages against his business competitor. My pain, my struggle, my uncertain future were all just means to his financial ends. You're using my accident to destroy your competition? I'm encouraging my son to get what he deserves while pursuing legitimate business interests. If those interests align, that's just good fortune. Good fortune. As if my shattered leg and destroyed relationship were lucky breaks in his corporate strategy. When court reconvened for the afternoon session, I could barely concentrate on the proceedings. Hayes called several more witnesses designed to minimize my injuries and future earning capacity. A vocational rehabilitation expert testified that warehouse workers with my education and experience typically earned modest wages regardless of physical limitations. An economist calculated my lifetime earnings at a fraction of what Jennifer had projected. Through it all, I kept thinking about my father's confession. Every piece of testimony about my limitations wasn't just about my case, it was about his business strategy. Every dollar the jury might award me was leverage against Morrison Construction's ability to compete for his dream project. Jennifer's closing argument was passionate and well-crafted. She reminded the jury that Thomas Brennan had made a choice to drink and drive, that his criminal negligence had destroyed my life trajectory, that no amount of money could restore what I'd lost. She asked for $2.8 million in damages, enough to cover medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and future treatment costs. Hayes responded with cold efficiency. She acknowledged the accident was unfortunate, but argued that I was seeking to profit from misfortune far beyond what was reasonable. She pointed to Dr. Moore's testimony about my eventual recovery, to my work supervisor's lukewarm assessment of my career prospects, to the pre-existing injury that had made my current damage more severe. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes concluded, this case isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about fair compensation for actual damages. Mr. Ken will recover from his injuries. He will work again. He will live a full life. The question is whether that life should be subsidized by an excessive settlement that rewards him for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, I realized that everything now depended on 12 strangers deciding whether my suffering was worth what Jennifer had asked for, or whether Hayes was right that I was just an opportunist looking for easy money. The man with military bearing was still in the back row, still watching everything with that same focused attention. When he caught me looking at him, he smiled slightly, not with pity or judgment, but with something that looked like understanding. I had no idea that within hours he would stand up and speak 6 words that would change everything. The jury deliberations stretched into the evening hours. Jennifer and I waited in the courthouse cafeteria, picking at stale sandwiches while tracking every sound from the corridor that might signal a verdict. My father had disappeared after closing arguments, claiming he had important calls to make. But I suspected he was somewhere calculating how Morrison Construction's potential payout might affect his business prospects. At 7:30 p.m., just as the courthouse was preparing to close for the night, we got word that the jury had reached a decision. My heart hammered against my ribs as we made our way back to Courtroom 4B. The gallery had filled up again. Word of a verdict always drew curious observers who wanted to witness the moment when someone's fate was decided by strangers. The military-looking man had returned to his seat in the back row. This time, he wasn't alone. A woman, who appeared to be his wife, sat beside him, along with a younger man who bore a striking resemblance to both of them. All 3 watched the proceedings with the same intense focus, as if they had a personal stake in the outcome. Judge Mullins called the court to order as the 12 jurors filed back into the jury box. Their faces revealed nothing. Some looked tired, others seemed relieved to have finished their civic duty. The foreman, a middle-aged accountant named David Reese, stood with a folded piece of paper that contained my financial future. Has the jury reached a verdict in the matter of Chen versus Brennan and Morrison Construction Company? We have, Your Honor. Please read the verdict. Reese cleared his throat and unfolded the paper. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Chen. We award damages in the amount of $425,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $425,000. Not the $2.8 million Jennifer had requested, not even half of what we'd hoped for, but still a significant amount that would cover my medical bills and provide some financial cushion while I figured out what to do with the rest of my life. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "It's not everything we wanted, but it's a solid win. We can work with this." Across the aisle, Patricia Hayes was shaking hands with Thomas Brennan, clearly pleased with the reduced award. Brennan himself looked relieved, but not celebratory. Whatever his faults, he seemed to understand that my injuries were real and painful. As the judge dismissed the jury and began wrapping up procedural details, I heard footsteps behind me. My father approached with an expression I couldn't quite read, part satisfaction, part disappointment. "Well," he said, loud enough for the departing jurors to hear, "I guess that's something at least." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. There was a dismissiveness there, a suggestion that even this partial victory wasn't quite enough. I turned to look at him more carefully and noticed he was holding his phone, the screen showing what looked like a financial website or stock tracker. "Dad, are you checking Morrison Construction's stock price?" He had the grace to look embarrassed for about half a second. "Just keeping tabs on market reaction to the verdict. These things can affect share prices." The casual way he said it, as if my lawsuit was just another business transaction to monitor, sparked something hot and angry in my chest. $400,000, Dad. That's what 12 people decided my leg is worth. That's what they think my pain and suffering and lost opportunities add up to. Grateful for what, exactly? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Grateful that a drunk driver destroyed my leg. Grateful that my girlfriend left me. Grateful that I can't do the job I used to do, or play sports, or walk upstairs with pain.
Grateful that you're getting paid for your troubles. Grateful. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, the courtroom was emptying, as lawyers packed their briefcases and spectators headed for the exits. But something about my father's attitude, his barely concealed focus on what this meant for his business interests, finally pushed me past my breaking point. Grateful for what, exactly? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Grateful that a drunk driver destroyed my leg. Grateful that my girlfriend left me. Grateful that I can't do the job I used to do or play sports or walk upstairs with pain. Grateful that you're getting paid for your troubles.
Several people in the gallery had stopped leaving to watch our exchange. Jennifer put a warning hand on my arm, but I was beyond caring about public scenes. That's business, Marcus. Sometimes opportunities align in unexpected ways. Opportunities. I shook my head in disgust. My accident was an opportunity for you. My pain is helping your bottom line. My settlement is your competitive advantage. You're being dramatic. Am I? I interrupted. Let me ask you something, Dad. If this jury had awarded me nothing, if I'd lost this case completely, would you still be here? Would you still be pretending to care about my recovery? For the first time since I'd known him, my father seemed genuinely speechless. His mouth opened and closed without sound, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been shame. But then he laughed. It started as a chuckle, barely audible, but it grew louder and more bitter with each passing second. Soon he was laughing hard enough that tears formed in the corners of his eyes, and the sound echoed off the courtroom's walls like something broken and cruel. You want to know the truth, Marcus? He said between gasps of laughter. You want to know what I really think? I didn't answer, but he continued anyway. I think you're pathetic. I think you've been pathetic your whole life, and now you're using these crutches as an excuse to be even more pathetic. He gestured at my mobility aids with obvious disgust. Look at you, standing there acting like a victim, like the world owes you something because you got hurt. The courtroom had gone completely quiet. Even the bailiff had stopped what he was doing to stare at us. Jennifer was tugging at my sleeve, trying to get me to sit down and end this public humiliation, but I couldn't move. You know what the real tragedy is? My father continued, his laughter finally subsiding into something cold and vicious. It's not that you got hit by a drunk driver. It's that you were exactly the same person before the accident as you are now. Weak, unambitious, looking for someone else to solve your problems. The only difference is now you have a better excuse. The words hit me like physical blows. Every insecurity I'd harbored about myself, every doubt about whether I deserved the settlement money, every fear that maybe I was taking the easy way out, he'd given voice to all of it with surgical precision. At least, he said, straightening his tie and preparing to leave, this settlement will be enough to keep you comfortable while you spend the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself. Maybe you can even afford a nicer apartment where you can sit around playing video games and ordering takeout without having to pretend you're trying to build something meaningful. That's when the man from the back row stood up. He moved with the fluid economy of someone accustomed to command, walking down the aisle between the gallery seats with measured steps that seemed to echo louder than they should have. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of presence that made everyone in the room turn to watch him approach. My father noticed him too, and paused in his verbal assault to see what this stranger wanted. The man stopped about 3 feet away from us, his gray eyes moving from my father to me and back again. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd given orders in life and death situations. "Excuse me," he said, addressing my father directly, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with your son." "This is a private family matter," my father replied, his tone suggesting the stranger should mind his own business. The man smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Actually, I think it became a public matter when you decided to mock a disabled veteran in open court." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. My father's face went pale, and I saw several people in the gallery lean forward with sudden interest.
I'm sorry, but there must be a mistake. My son isn't a veteran. He's never served in the military." His eyes never left my father's face. "You're right. Marcus Chen isn't a veteran. But his story, his injuries, his struggle to rebuild his life, his refusal to give up despite chronic pain, that's the story of every wounded warrior who's had to relearn how to walk, how to work, how to find purpose after everything they thought they knew about themselves got destroyed." He took a step closer to my father, and I noticed that other people in the courtroom had gone completely still, as if sensing that something significant was about to happen.
"You want to know what I see when I look at your son?" the man continued. "I see courage. I see someone who gets up every day despite pain that would cripple most people. I see someone who's fighting to rebuild his life after a traumatic event that wasn't his fault." My father tried to interrupt, but the man held up a hand that somehow commanded silence. "What I don't see," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "is someone who deserves to be mocked by the person who should be supporting him most." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. The man stood there for another moment, letting his words sink in, before he spoke the 6 words that would echo in my mind for years to come. "Son, your father's the real cripple." The silence that followed those 6 words was deafening. "Son, your father's the real cripple." They hung in the air like a verdict, more final than anything the jury had delivered. My father's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, embarrassment, and something that looked dangerously close to rage. "Who the hell do you think you are?" my father snarled, taking a step toward the stranger. "You don't know anything about our family or our situation." The man didn't retreat an inch. If anything, he seemed to grow taller, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. "Master Chief, Petty Officer James Harrison, United States Navy, retired. 26 years of service, including 4 deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq." He paused, letting his credentials sink in. "And you're absolutely right. I don't know your family, but I know courage when I see it, and I know cowardice, too." My father's bluster faltered slightly. "This has nothing to do with you." "Actually, it has everything to do with me." Harrison's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. "See, I came here today because my nephew was supposed to testify in this trial." My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. Harrison continued, his gaze shifting to include me in the conversation. "Corporal David Harrison, Marine Corps. He was the first responder who pulled you out of your car after the accident, Marcus. He stayed with you until the paramedics arrived, applied pressure to your leg wound to prevent you from bleeding out, talked to you to keep you conscious." Harrison's voice softened slightly. "He saved your life." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I remembered fragments from that day, a voice telling me to stay awake, strong hands putting pressure on my leg, someone saying my name over and over. I'd never learned who that first responder was, and in the chaos of medical treatment and legal proceedings, I'd never thought to ask. "David couldn't be here today because he's currently deployed in Syria," Harrison continued, his gaze shifting to include me in the conversation. "Corporal David Harrison, Marine Corps. He was the first responder who pulled you out of your car after the accident, Marcus. He stayed with you until the paramedics arrived, applied pressure to your leg wound to prevent you from bleeding out, talked to you to keep you conscious." Harrison's voice softened slightly. "He saved your life." "David couldn't be here today because he's currently deployed in Syria," Harrison continued, his eyes hardened as they fixed on my father again. I don't think he expected to witness this kind of betrayal. My father was struggling to regain control of the situation. "Listen, you don't understand the full context here. Marcus has always been what? Has always been your son, has always deserved your support and love, has always needed a father who would stand by him during the hardest time of his life." Other people in the courtroom were starting to approach, drawn by the intensity of the exchange. Jennifer had given up trying to get me to sit down and was watching the scene unfold with fascination. Even Judge Mullins, who should have cleared the courtroom by now, seemed transfixed by what was happening. "You want to talk about weakness?" Harrison asked, his voice rising for the first time. "Let me tell you about my weakness. Weakness is abandoning your child when they need you most. Weakness is using someone else's tragedy for your own gain. Weakness is standing in a courtroom and mocking your son's injuries like they're some kind of character flaw." He took another step closer to my father, and I noticed that Harrison walked with a slight limp of his own. "You know what strength looks like? Strength is getting up every morning when your body screams at you to stay in bed. Strength is learning to walk again when doctors tell you it might not be possible. Strength is facing uncertainty about your future and choosing to keep fighting anyway. My father tried once more to assert himself. You don't know what you're talking about. Marcus has been coasting through life for years. Maybe this accident was exactly the wake-up call he needed to... To what? To realize that his father is a selfish, manipulative bastard who cares more about a business deal than his own son's well-being? The courtroom gasped collectively. Even in my emotionally charged state, I was shocked by the bluntness of Harrison's assessment. But looking at my father's face, I could see the truth of it reflected there. I've seen combat, Mr. Chen, Harrison continued, his voice dropping back to that dangerous calm. I've watched 19-year-old kids lose limbs to IEDs and then spend months learning to walk again with prosthetics. I've held dying soldiers who asked me to tell their fathers they were sorry for not being stronger. And you know what every single one of those fathers told me when I delivered those messages? My father didn't answer, but Harrison didn't wait for a response.
They told me they were proud. They told me their sons were heroes. They told me they wished they could take their children's pain onto themselves. Harrison's eyes blazed with controlled fury. Not one of them, not one, ever suggested their child deserved what happened to them or that their injuries were some kind of cosmic justice for past mistakes. The woman who had been sitting with Harrison approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. She was in her early 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to supporting others through difficult times. James, she said softly, maybe we should... No, Linda, Harrison replied without looking away from my father. This needs to be said. He addressed my father directly again. Your son nearly died in that car accident. A drunk driver. Someone else's criminal negligence destroyed his leg and changed his life forever. And instead of rallying around him, instead of helping him heal and rebuild, you turned his tragedy into your business opportunity. My father's face was red now. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. You have no right to judge me. You don't know the pressures I'm under, the financial obligations. Financial obligations? Harrison's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call it? Let me tell you about obligations. When my nephew pulled your son from that wreckage, he took on an obligation to make sure Marcus was okay. When I promised David I'd check on his patient, I took on an obligation to see that justice was done. When you became a father, you took on an obligation to love and support your child unconditionally. He paused, letting that sink in before delivering his final blow. The difference is, we kept our obligations. You threw yours away for a chance at a construction contract. The younger man who had been sitting with Harrison and his wife stepped forward. He was probably in his late 20s, with the same strong jaw and direct gaze as the older man. When he spoke, his voice carried traces of a southern accent. "Excuse me, sir," he said, addressing my father with military courtesy that somehow made his words more cutting. "I'm Lieutenant Michael Harrison, James's son. I just wanted you to know that I've been deployed twice to Afghanistan, and I've never met a soldier who wouldn't trade places with their injured buddy if they could. That's what family does. We take each other's pain when possible, and we carry each other when it's not." He looked at me with genuine respect. "Mr. Chen, what you've been through, the way you've handled it, the strength you've shown, that's the kind of courage we recognize in the military. You should be proud of how you fought through this." Tears were stinging my eyes now, but they weren't tears of pain or embarrassment. For the first time in months, someone was telling me that my struggle mattered, that my efforts to rebuild my life had value, that I was demonstrating strength rather than weakness. My father made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This is all very touching, but you people don't understand the complexities of the situation. Marcus has always had problems with motivation and..." "Stop." The word came out of my mouth with more force than I'd managed in months. My father looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd forgotten I was capable of standing up to him. "Just stop, Dad." I gripped my crutches tighter, using them to steady myself as I faced him fully. "You're right about one thing.
I wasn't particularly ambitious before the accident. I was coasting, taking the easy path, not pushing myself to grow or achieve more. But you know what? Even if that's true, it doesn't mean I deserved to get hit by a drunk driver. It doesn't mean my injuries are some kind of karmic justice for past mistakes. And it sure as hell doesn't mean you get to use my pain to make money. My father opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand, the same gesture Harrison had used to command silence. I'm not done. You want to know what this accident really taught me? It taught me that life can change in an instant. It taught me that the people you think will support you might abandon you when things get hard. It taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help. I glanced at Harrison and his family, who were watching with encouraging expressions. But most importantly, it taught me the difference between people who build you up and people who tear you down. I took a painful step closer to my father, my crutches clicking against the courtroom floor. You've spent my whole life telling me I wasn't good enough, that I was lazy, that I was disappointing. I used to think maybe I was right. Maybe I was all those things you said. My father's expression had shifted from anger to something that looked almost like fear. But these people, I gestured toward Harrison and his family, they looked at my situation and saw courage. They saw someone worth defending. They saw strength where you saw weakness. I paused, feeling a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. That tells me everything I need to know about who has the real problem here.
The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Harrison spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. Marcus, I want you to know something. My nephew David has been worried about you for months. He's asked about you in every email he sent from overseas. When I tell him about today, about how you handled yourself, about the strength you showed, he's going to be proud. We all are. Linda Harrison stepped forward with a warm smile. We'd like to stay in touch, if that's okay with you. David will be home in 3 months, and I know he'd love to meet you properly. Michael added, and if you ever need anything, career advice, job references, just someone to talk to who understands what it's like to rebuild after trauma, we're here. The contrast was overwhelming. Here were complete strangers offering the support and understanding that my own father had withheld. The realization hit me that family wasn't just about blood relations. It was about the people who chose to stand by you when things got difficult. My father seemed to deflate as he watched this exchange. The anger had drained out of him, replaced with something that looked like bewilderment. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might try to salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. Instead, he straightened his tie, that habitual gesture of his when he was preparing to leave uncomfortable situations, and picked up his briefcase. I have calls to make. The Morrison situation still needs to be handled, settlement or no settlement. Even now, even after everything that had happened, he was thinking about his business interests. As he walked toward the courtroom exit, he paused and looked back at me one final time. When you've spent that settlement money and you're looking for handouts, don't come to me. You've made your choice about whose side you're on. With that, he left. The sound of his expensive shoes echoing down the marble hallway gradually faded until it was gone entirely. Harrison watched him go with an expression of disgust. Some people never learn, he said quietly. Then he turned to me with a smile that transformed his entire face. But some people do. And something tells me you're going to figure out exactly what you want to do with the second chance you've been given. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, congratulations from Jennifer, and conversations with the Harrison family. They told me about David's military service, about their own struggles with his deployments, and the constant worry that came with having a child in harm's way. They shared stories of other wounded veterans they'd known, people who had found ways to build meaningful lives after catastrophic injuries. As we prepared to leave the courthouse, Linda Harrison handed me a business card with her contact information. I run a nonprofit that helps people transition back to work after major life changes. It's not just for veterans. We work with anyone who's had to rebuild their life after trauma. If you're interested, we have some programs that might help you figure out what comes next. I looked at the card, then at the 3 people who had somehow become my advocates and allies in the space of a single afternoon.
Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. James Harrison smiled. David told me something after he got back from his first deployment. He said the difference between surviving and thriving after trauma isn't how tough you are. It's whether you have people in your corner who believe in your ability to rebuild. He gestured toward where my father had been standing earlier. You spent today learning who's not in your corner. Now you're learning who is. 3 months later, I was working part-time at Linda Harrison's nonprofit, helping other trauma survivors navigate the complex process of rebuilding their lives. The work was challenging, but meaningful in a way my warehouse job had never been. My legs still hurt on bad days, and I still needed crutches for long walks, but I'd learned to see these as accommodations rather than limitations. David Harrison returned from his deployment in July, and we met for coffee at a small cafe near the Veterans Hospital. He was younger than I expected, probably only 23 or 24, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from seeing real combat. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but careful, as if he understood how precious the simple act of human connection could be. "I've been wanting to ask you something," he said after we'd talked for a while about his deployment and my recovery. "That day of the accident, do you remember anything about it?" I closed my eyes, trying to recall those hazy moments between the impact and losing consciousness. Not much. I remember someone telling me to stay awake, someone putting pressure on my leg, a voice saying everything was going to be okay. David nodded. "I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but when the paramedics arrived, you grabbed my hand and asked me to call your father. You said you needed him to know you were sorry." The memory hit me like a physical blow. Even in my moment of greatest need, even when I thought I might be dying, I'd been worried about disappointing my father.
I never made that call, David continued, because by the time I got to the hospital, I'd heard you talking to the paramedics about your family situation, and I realized that calling your father might not be what you actually needed. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I want you to know that your first instinct when you thought you might die wasn't selfish or weak. You were thinking about someone else, trying to repair a relationship, taking responsibility for things that probably weren't your fault. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before David asked, "Do you ever talk to your father anymore?" I shook my head. He tried calling once, about a month after the trial. Left a voicemail saying he'd gotten the Riverside Mall contract and asking if I wanted to invest some of my settlement money in his company. I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I didn't call him back. "Do you regret that?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Sometimes I wonder if I should try to fix things with him. He's still my father, you know? But then I remember how he laughed at my crutches, how he called me pathetic in front of a courtroom full of people, and I realized that some relationships are too toxic to salvage. David nodded thoughtfully. "In the military, we have a saying, you can't save someone who's drowning if they're going to pull you under with them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to save yourself first." The settlement money had indeed changed my life, but not in the way my father had predicted. Instead of making me complacent, it had given me the freedom to pursue work that mattered, to build relationships with people who saw my worth, to create a life based on purpose rather than just survival. I bought a small house with wheelchair accessibility features, not because I needed a wheelchair, but because my work with the nonprofit sometimes brought disabled clients to my home for meetings. I invested most of the remaining money conservatively, using only the interest to supplement my nonprofit salary. But the real change wasn't financial, it was psychological. The trial had forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my life before the accident. My lack of ambition, my tendency to take the path of least resistance, my willingness to accept mediocrity. My father had been right about some of those things, even if his delivery was cruel and his motivation selfish. The difference was that now I was addressing those shortcomings from a place of self-respect rather than self-loathing. I was working to improve myself because I believed I was worth the effort, not because someone was telling me I was fundamentally flawed.
6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor at the nonprofit office. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, appeared one afternoon wearing a nervous smile and carrying a coffee that had clearly been an excuse to stop by. "I heard about what you're doing here," she said, gesturing around the office where I was helping a young veteran fill out job applications. "It's really amazing, Marcus. I always knew you had it in you to do something meaningful." The irony wasn't lost on me. When I was struggling with basic mobility and drowning in depression, she'd found me too difficult to handle. Now that I was thriving professionally and emotionally, she was ready to see my potential again. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." She lingered for a few more minutes, clearly hoping for more conversation, perhaps even a chance to reconnect. But I'd learned something important about relationships over the past year. The people who love you don't disappear when life gets complicated. They might struggle with their own limitations and fears, but they don't abandon you when you need them most. Sarah was a good person who had been overwhelmed by circumstances she didn't know how to handle. I didn't blame her for leaving, but I also didn't feel obligated to welcome her back now that I was doing better. After she left, I thought about the different ways people had responded to my accident. My father had seen an opportunity. Sarah had seen the burden. The medical professionals had seen a case to treat. The lawyers had seen a case to win or defend. But the Harrison family had seen a person worth defending. They'd seen courage worth recognizing. They'd seen potential worth nurturing. That evening, I called James Harrison to update him on my work at the nonprofit. We'd developed a friendship over the months since the trial, talking regularly about everything from job prospects to dating to the ongoing challenges of recovery. "I've been thinking about what you said that day in the courtroom, about my father being the real cripple." I probably shouldn't have said that. It was harsh, even if it was true. Maybe, but it was also exactly what I needed to hear. For years, I'd been letting him define my worth, accepting his assessment that I was lazy and disappointing. Hearing someone call out his behavior, seeing how shocked other people were by the way he treated me, and it made me realize that the problem wasn't me. The problem was never you, Marcus. You were dealing with trauma and trying to rebuild your life. That takes incredible strength.
I know that now, but at the time, I was so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see what I was gaining. The accident forced me to reevaluate everything: my relationships, my career, my priorities. In a weird way, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's a pretty remarkable perspective. I'm not saying I'm glad it happened. The pain is real, and there are still days when I struggle, but I'm a better person now than I was before the accident. I have more meaningful work, stronger relationships, a clearer sense of purpose. If I could go back and prevent the accident, I'm not sure I would. And your father? I considered the question carefully. I think my father is trapped in a prison of his own making. He's so focused on success and achievement and financial gain that he can't see what really matters. In a way, I feel sorry for him. Sorry enough to reconcile? No, feeling sorry for someone doesn't mean you have to subject yourself to their toxicity. I've learned that loving someone sometimes means loving them from a distance. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my small house at the accessibility features I'd installed, not just for myself, but to help others, at the photos of my new friends and colleagues, at the awards on the wall recognizing my work with trauma survivors. My crutches were leaning against the kitchen counter, just as they had been that day when my father visited before the trial. But now I saw them differently. They weren't symbols of limitation or weakness. They were tools that helped me navigate the world, no different than glasses or hearing aids or any other accommodation that allowed people to live full lives. More importantly, they were reminders of how far I'd come. Every step I took with them was an act of defiance against the drunk driver who had tried to steal my mobility, against the father who had mocked my struggle, against the voice in my own head that had whispered I wasn't strong enough to rebuild.
The sound of metal crutches against hardwood floors had once filled me with shame and frustration. Now, it sounded like victory, the rhythm of a life reclaimed, one careful step at a time.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.